A dead woman lying alone on a distant hill.
Could investigators determine anything else by looking over the body?
She had significant skull fractures, blunt force trauma, and that was ultimately the cause of death.
We know that this is potentially our murder weapon. You have a solid rock. We have blood from our victim on that rock, but we most importantly probably have DNA from our suspect on the rock.
When he told me that Danielle had been murdered, I couldn't believe it.
Despite her problems, though, she was still able to start a family, correct?
I mean, that was her goal. That was what she wanted, to be a wife and a mother.
Her husband was somewhat of an enabler. He would sometimes help her out by buying drugs for her.
To have that kind of fear, to know somebody is going to do something to you like that, is terrifying. And I don't like to picture my sister's last thought was fear.
Hi, I'm Nancy O'Dell. Today's Crime Exposé takes us to Ventura, California. Perched on the Pacific coast, Ventura boasts rolling ocean waves and pleasant sunshine. But like any city, it also suffers its share of criminal activity. The discovery of a badly beaten corpse kicked off the seemingly endless pursuit of a murderer who was always just out of reach. An industrious team of investigators with cutting-edge technology would resuscitate this case years after the fact and finally ID the killer.
On a warm July morning, a landscaping crew stumbled over the remains of a woman in her early 40s. Her corpse lay crumpled in a drainage ditch on a lonely hillside above the city.
She was partially clothed. She had socks on, and she had a pair of underwear that were partially on. There was a pair of jeans that were her jeans that were nearby, and one shoe. The other shoe has never been found.
The victim had been murdered the night before, and the dry California climate helped maintain the integrity of the crime scene.
It was very remote, it was very untouched, so that all really played hugely into preserving our crime scene as it was.
And could investigators determine anything else by looking over the body?
When they got there, from looking at her, just the amount of blood and there was dirt, they couldn't tell who she was. She was taken to the medical examiner's office.
And were they able to determine who she was?
Later that day, they were able to take her fingerprints, and they identified her through her fingerprints.
The woman had died violently, the killer repeatedly slamming a heavy object into her face.
They did an autopsy, and they found that she had significant skull fractures, blunt force trauma, and that was ultimately the cause of death.
The weapon of choice was a rock, indicating that this attack was provoked rather than planned. Something had ignited the killer's temper. He snapped up the closest item within reach and beat his victim with it.
There was a rock that was found near her body. It was probably a weapon that was chosen out of opportunity, but the rock itself had a significant amount of blood on it, and it was clear that that's what was used.
How does a forensic specialist approach a piece of evidence like that?
We know that this is potentially our murder weapon. You have to be very delicate with the way you preserve that as evidence. You have a solid rock. We see visible blood on the rock, and we know that we have blood from our victim on that rock, but we most importantly probably have DNA from our suspect on the rock.
So how do you get it from there on the ground to a safe place to examine it for evidence?
So at that point in time, with gloved hands, taking all precautions, I would collect the rock, place it in a breathable bag, and then place that rock into a freezer. That will preserve any DNA evidence that's held on that rock.
Meanwhile, the police had a heart-wrenching responsibility to fulfill. notifying the family of Danielle Clause that she wasn't coming home.
He came over and he told me to turn the TV off. He had something to tell me. And when he told me that Danielle had been murdered, I couldn't believe it.
Danielle was 42, an amateur artist, a wife, and mother.
She was married at the time. She had a son.
On her last visit to Ventura, Danielle had spent time with a friend and then dropped out of sight.
And she was seen talking to a white male who was driving a white pickup truck. Danielle's friend was keeping an eye on her, saw her talking to this guy. She looked away for a little while, and when she looked back, Danielle wasn't there, and the pickup truck wasn't there anymore.
It was July 15th, the last day that Danielle Clause was seen alive.
She was found the following day by some landscapers in the area.
6 months of painstaking police work revealed very little. Nobody knew what happened after Danielle got into the pickup truck. No one had seen the driver, and no one had witnessed the murder.
They weren't able to make significant progress because, honestly, there wasn't a lot to go on.
There was nowhere else to go. With no further tips or clues arriving on the detectives' desks, the case file would remain open and unsolved for 3 decades.
Odds are of you coming up with a new witness after 30 years, that's probably pretty slim.
In the years after Danielle Clause was killed with a rock on a California hillside, the case file was stored in a database at the Ventura City Police Department, and the evidence carefully locked away in a freezer.
It would be 32 years before new technology and curious investigators would dust the cobwebs off this very old case.
The Golden State Killer case was in the news, and the people working on that case had just identified who the offender was.
The offender was Joseph James D'Angelo Jr., arrested after committing multiple murders, rapes, and burglaries across California over a 13-year period.
When that broke, we really started looking back into everything, and so I started looking at some of the other cold cases that we have.
Amongst those cold cases, the murder of Danielle Clause.
One of the next things I did is I got in touch with one of our CSI techs, Gabby Weimer.
There were 3 pertinent items of evidence. First and foremost, we had the sexual assault kit that was collected from Danielle during the autopsy. Next, we had the murder weapon, which we believe was that rock, about a 2-pound rock that was located near her body. Third, we, as investigators, took scrapings and clippings of Danielle's fingernails.
Advancements in DNA testing over the years might reveal fresh information and get the case back on track.
People think, why would you take clippings of a fingernail? So during the type of attack that Danielle sustained, it's very evident that it was close contact, right? There was probably a struggle, and she probably came in contact with her offender. So we're thinking grabbing, fighting, trying to claw, anything that she could to defend herself.
This type of DNA transmitted during close contact is known as touch DNA.
It was very evident that there was blood on this rock. We knew it belonged to Danielle, but now as technology progressed, we are focused on the touch DNA. So the rock was essentially swabbed with a cotton, sterile cotton tip. It was swabbed around the rock, and then that swab would be preserved and later tested.
During the original investigation, the medical examiner had run a sexual assault kit on the body of Danielle Clause. The results indicated that sexual activity had occurred on the night she was murdered.
When we got the rock and the fingernails tested, we got the same profile that matched the profile that we had from the sexual assault kit. So at that point, we know, okay, that's probably our guy.
To narrow down the list of suspects, investigators fed the data into CODIS, which is
the combined DNA index system. It's a database that was developed by the FBI. It's a DNA database. And so when you go out to a crime scene, you collect some sort of DNA evidence and you enter that profile into the database. You're hoping that it's going to hit to somebody, maybe a convicted offender, or maybe it's going to hit to another case and you're going to start developing a sequence from similar casework.
Unfortunately, CODIS failed to produce a match, but that didn't stop investigators.
Well, the investigators with the Golden State Killer case, they took that further and they used genealogy, and they were able to whittle down that suspect pool and ultimately find the offender.
Police applied the same tactic to the murder of Danielle Clause, but could they track down her killer by tracing his family bloodline?
As our genetic genealogist was able to build a family tree, we got a major breakthrough.
A generation had passed since Danielle Clause was laid to rest. During that time, her mother died, brokenhearted, and the rest of Danielle's family continued to mourn her loss.
She had a sense of loyalty. She was always a loyal friend.
When she was in her 20s, Danielle had been drugged and sexually assaulted. Memories of that nightmare tormented her for the remainder of her life.
When she came out of it, she wasn't right in the head.
Looking to ease the pain, Danielle started an on-again, off-again relationship with drugs.
She would get clean for a year or so, and then go back, and struggled with that for several years. And at the time, she was murdered. She had been clean for a couple of years, I believe, and she had just started using drugs again.
During the initial investigation into her death, Danielle's husband was considered a suspect, but police quickly crossed him off their list.
Her husband was very much in love with her, but he was somewhat of an enabler. He would sometimes help her out by buying drugs for her, but he was cooperative with the investigation, and really he didn't have any information about what had happened to her that day.
Years later, after a new round of DNA testing proved inconclusive, investigators tried a fairly new tactic: forensic genetic genealogy. Could probing someone's family lineage identify the murderer? Or would the death of Danielle Clause remain a perpetual mystery?
The genealogist's role when investigating a cold case homicide and you're looking to use forensic genetic genealogy, they are the ones that are in charge of developing this family tree.
You get a genealogist that takes your profile and you compare it to a known pool of profiles, and you start getting names of people that are vaguely related to your offender.
This time, the police hit paid off. The forensic genealogist traced the killer to one family, and eventually to one person in that family, a man named Larry Welch.
My next step was literally to run upstairs and tell Detective Tyler Buck that we identified him. They found him. It's him.
Danielle's killer now had a name, but there was a problem. Larry Welch had been dead for 25 years.
It was a disappointment to hear that he was dead, but it was closure to me to be able to know about him.
But the case continued to throw curveballs. For one thing, Larry Welch's personal history was fairly benign. He didn't appear to be the killing type.
Larry had a P.O. box here in Ventura around the time of the homicide. He had a boat that was in a marina in one of our neighboring cities. He definitely had ties to the area.
But Danielle and her killer did have one thing in common. They both used drugs, and they both needed a way to buy them. Did their deadly evening rendezvous involve a drug buy, or was the couple making some other arrangement? The police attempted to reconstruct what happened that night.
A lot of it's speculation, but we know that after the fact, Larry was found to actually own a pickup truck that was very similar to the one that Danielle was seen talking to right at the time of her disappearance.
Police say after chatting with Larry, Danielle hopped into the truck. Larry drove up a nearby hill to a cul-de-sac at the top, and then
something happened and Danielle got herself out of the car and she probably tried to get away from him.
Detectives say whatever their disagreement, Larry Welch lost his temper and went fishing for a weapon. That he grabbed a nearby rock and began pummeling Danielle in the face and head.
This whole thing is probably not something that was planned. It was probably a crime of opportunity. The rock just happened to be right there. That's what was used.
Her family now knew how Danielle died, but they would never know why.
To have that kind of fear to know somebody is going to do something to you like that is terrifying. And I don't like to picture my sister's last thought was there. Her last feeling was there.
Unfortunately, there's only 2 people that know what happened, and both of them have passed on. We know from Larry's family that he had an explosive temper, so I believe something happened up there that caused him to snap, and what that might be, we'll never know.
Perhaps solving half the mystery was better than solving none at all. But for this investigation, one truth was indisputable. Without advanced DNA testing and forensic genealogy, the person who murdered Danielle Clause would still be unknown.
I have that hope that people like me who have lost someone to violence will have hope that it can be solved. That's the best thing that I can do, is give them hope.
Perhaps justice for Danielle Clause was neither swift or substantial. After all, her killer died before he could answer for his crimes. But if Larry Welch had stolen his victim's remaining years, well, then his own early death might have been some form of poetic justice. And now, it's time for today's Safety Spotlight. While most murder victims are killed by someone they know, in the tragic case of Danielle Clause, her murderer appeared to be a total stranger. Stranger danger can be a real thing, and it's important to take steps to maximize your safety from the unknown threats around you. If something feels off or you feel uncomfortable around someone, trust your instincts and remove yourself from the situation if possible. Avoid accepting rides from a stranger. When possible, call a friend or family member instead. And if that's not feasible, use public transportation, a taxi, or a reputable rideshare service. If someone tries to force you into a vehicle or otherwise threatens you, make as much noise as possible. Scream, shout, and try to make a scene to attract attention. Try to escape and run to a safer location. If you survived a sexual assault, you can get help and confidential support by calling the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673. For all of us here at Crime Exposé, please join us next time and stay safe.